Good morning, class 10. Today we have to conclude the chapter Nationalism in Europe. Last time we did two very important headings, Unification of Germany and Unification of Italy. Today, before starting a new heading, I am just going to read out the key points, the main points which will make you revise Unification of Germany and Italy. I am reading out for you. Please pay attention. In Unification of Germany, Bismarck, with the help of the Prussian army and the bureaucracy, took the leadership for national unification. 3 wars over 7 years ended in Prussian victory and completed the process of unification. Kaiser William I of Prussia headed the new German Empire. This is just a very brief summary of German unification. Now, unification of Italy. Italy was divided into 7 states. Only Sardinia Piedmont was ruled by the Italian princely state. Initially, the unification program was headed by Mazzini, but it failed. Chief Minister Count Cavour led the movement with the help of Garibaldi. I told you in my last class that 3 main people were behind the unification of Italy. The first name was Mazzini, followed by Cavour, joined by Garibaldi. In 1861, Victor Emmanuel II was proclaimed the King of United Italy. So this is just a brief recap of what we did last time. Now let us start another new heading, that is the strange case of Britain, or we can say the unification of Britain. But don't forget that the most important among these 3, unification of Germany, unification of Italy, and this heading, the most important are the previous 2. That means the unification of Germany and Italy. Now let us begin. The strange case of Britain. The model of the nation or the nation state, some scholars have argued, is Great Britain. In Britain, the formation of the nation state was not the result of a sudden upheaval or revolution. It was the result of a long drawn out process. There was no British nation prior to the 18th century. The primary identities of the people who inhabited the British Isles were ethnic ones. That means they had a similar cultural background, or they belong to the same nationality. The primary identities of the people who inhabited the British Isles were ethnic ones, such as English, Welsh, Scot, or Irish. All of these ethnic groups had their own cultural and political traditions. But as the English nation steadily grew in wealth, importance, and power, it was able to extend its influence over the other nations of the island. The English Parliament, which had seized power from the monarchy in 1688 at the end of the protracted conflict, was the instrument through which the nation state, with England at its center, came to be forged. Now I have also written some important meanings for you. Let me tell you the meaning of protracted conflict. A hostile interaction between communal groups. Hostile means not friendly. Hostile interaction between communal groups. People belonging to different religions start fighting on the basis of their own religion or their religious beliefs, and the rivalry takes the form of a communal fight. So, hostile interaction between communal groups. This is the meaning of protracted conflict. I am reading this part once again. The English Parliament, which had seized power from the monarchy in 1688 at the end of the protracted conflict, was the instrument through which a nation state with England at its centre came to be forged. The Act of Union 1707 between England and Scotland that resulted in the formation of the United Kingdom of Great Britain meant, in effect, that England was able to oppose its influence on Scotland. The British Parliament was henceforth dominated by its English members. The growth of a British identity meant that Scotland's distinctive culture and political institutions were systematically suppressed. The Catholic clans that inhabited the Scottish Highlands suffered terrible repression whenever they attempted to assert their independence. The Scottish Highlanders were forbidden to speak the Gaelic language or wear their national dress, and large numbers were forcibly driven out of their homeland. Ireland suffered a similar fate. It was a country deeply divided between the Catholics and Protestants. The English helped the Protestants of Ireland to establish their dominance over a largely Catholic country. Catholic revolts against British dominance were suppressed. After a failed revolt led by Wolfe Tone and his United Irishmen, Ireland was forcibly incorporated into the United Kingdom in 1801. A new British nation was forged through the propagation of a dominant English culture. The symbols of the New Britain, the British flag, the Union Jack, the national anthem, God Save Our Noble King, the English language were actively promoted, and the older nations survived only as subordinate partners in this union. So this is the way the unification of Britain was accomplished. Now I am reading out the key points regarding this heading so that you can understand in a nutshell what we have read just now. In 1688, England was established as a nation state. The English Parliament seized power from the monarchy. The Act of Union 1707 resulted in the formation of United Kingdom of Great Britain. In 1801, Ireland was forcibly taken by the British. A new British nation was founded through the propagation of a dominant English culture. I am repeating all the points once again because this is the summary of what I have read for you just now under the heading The Strange Case of Britain. In 1688, England was established as a nation state. English Parliament seized power from the monarchy. The Act of Union 1707 resulted in the formation of United Kingdom of Great Britain. In 1801, Ireland was forcibly taken by the British. A new British nation was founded through the propagation of a dominant English culture. So this is how the unification of Britain was brought into process. Now let us move forward to our next heading, visualizing the nation. This heading, or when we will read further inside in the paragraphs, we will see how love towards the country, patriotic feelings towards the country were popularized. Visualizing the nation. While it is easy enough to represent a ruler through a portrait or a statue, how does one go about giving a face to a nation? Pay attention, it is quite interesting. I am reading the starting line again. While it is easy enough to represent a ruler through a portrait or a statue, how does one go about giving a face to a nation? That means a nation or a country can be represented through a portrait or in the form of a statue. But if we try to give a face to the nation, if we try to give a human figure to a nation, is it possible? Can we do it? Is it practical? Artists in the 18th and 19th century found a way out by personifying a nation. Personifying a nation means talking about nation in such a way as if it is a person, it is a male person or a female person. Personifying the nation, speaking about the nation in such a way as if the nation is a man or a woman. In other words, they represented a country as if it were a person, as just now I told you. Nations were then portrayed as female figures. Pay attention, here some lines are very important, like this one. Nations were then portrayed, that means the nations were talked about, they were taken as female figures. The female form that was chosen to personify the nation did not stand for any particular women in real life. Pay attention, I am reading again. The female form that was chosen to personify the nation, that means the female form that was chosen to talk about the nation as if it was that female person, in reality it was not any particular woman. There was no such real woman in practical life, in real life, but nation was personified. Nation was being talked about as if we are talking about a real woman, but actually there was no real woman. The female form that was chosen to personify the nation did not stand for any particular woman in real life. Rather, it sought to give the abstract idea of the nation a concrete form. It sought to give the abstract idea of the nation a concrete form. That means nation in its abstract form was talked about in such a way as if we are really talking about a lady, but actually there was no lady or a woman in reality. That is, the female figure became an allegory of the nation. Now children, on the same page from where I am reading, the meaning of allegory is given. I am reading out for you. You must try to remember this meaning. Allegory. When an abstract idea, for instance, greed, envy, freedom, liberty, is expressed through a person or a thing, an allegorical story has two meanings, one literal and one symbolic. Okay, so allegory means when we talk about any abstract idea, it can be idea of liberty, it can be idea of freedom, it can be envy, anything. When we talk about any abstract idea in such a way as if we are talking about a person or a thing, then it is called as allegory. And sometimes this can be the meaning, allegorical story can be taken as a literal one, that means actual one, or a symbolic. Here we are talking about symbolic. We are not talking about anything in literal sense. That is, the female figure became an allegory of the nation. That means it became a symbol for a nation. You will recall that during the French Revolution, artists used the female allegory to portray ideas such as liberty, justice, and republic. French Revolution, children, you have studied in class 9, and if you recall what you studied in the book, you will remember that there was a page in which broken chain was made, and many more figures, many more symbols were made. So each symbol had its own it had its own meaning, had its own you can say it represented something. It represented something for the nation. You will recall that during the French Revolution, artists used the female allegory to portray ideas such as liberty, justice, and republic. These ideals were represented through specific objects or symbols. As you would remember, the attributes of liberty are the red cap or the broken chain, while justice is generally a blindfolded woman carrying a pair of weighing scales. You have studied all these things. Various pictures were made in the chapter French Revolution, and each symbol had its own meaning. Similar female allegories were invented by artists in the 19th century to represent the nation. In France, she was christened Marianne. Now children, one very important suggestion I would give you, because this can help you in any question answer also. From this line, in France she was christened, till the last line of the next paragraph, that is, stands for heroism. Please learn everything, because sometimes specific questions are asked based on these two paragraphs. Learn this by heart. In France, she was christened Marianne, a popular Christian name which underlined the idea of a people's nation. So, sometimes in the question it is asked, what was Marianne? So what will you write? That the idea of people's nation in France was portrayed in the form of Marianne, a popular Christian name. Or you can start from in France as it is given in your chapter. She was christened Marianne. That means she was given a name as Marianne, a popular Christian name, which underlined the idea of people's nation. Her characteristics were drawn from those of liberty and republic: the red cap, the tricolor, the cockade. Okay, all these lines you will have to learn if you are asked about Marianne in the question. Her characteristics were drawn from those of liberty and the republic: the red cap, the tricolor, the cockade. Statues of Marianne were erected in public squares to remind the public of national symbol of unity and to persuade them to identify with it. Marianne images were marked on coins and stamps. So you can see there are so many important information which we are getting about Marianne in France. Please learn the whole paragraph about Marianne without leaving anything. So what did we study? That in France, the idea of people's nation was represented through Marianne, a popular Christian name. And she wore a red cap, had a tricolor and the cockade. The statues of Marianne were erected in public places so that the people could be reminded of the national symbol of unity and to persuade them to identify with it. Marianne images were marked on coins and stamps so that if there is more circulation of coins and stamps, the more people will use all the time the concept of unity and love towards their country. The idea towards their people's nation would always remain in their mind. So this is about Marianne. Now next paragraph. Similarly, Germania became the allegory of the German nation. Here again, I am reminding you that in the question sometimes it is asked, What was Marianne and Germania? So you will have to write everything about Marianne and Germania. Marianne I have read in the previous paragraph. Germania I am reading now. The Germania became the allegory of the German nation. In visual representations, Germania wears a crown of oak leaves, as the German oak stands for heroism. So this is all about Germania, which also you have to learn by heart. Don't miss out, because a very important question can be framed from this part. Now let us come to our last heading, that is nationalism and imperialism. By the last quarter of the 19th century, nationalism no longer retained its idealistic liberal democratic sentiment of the first half of the century, but became a narrow creed with limited ends. That means by the end of the 19th century, nationalism was now again confined to limited people. It was not spread among the masses. This feeling of nationalism was now constrained to some people, limited to some people. During this period, nationalist groups became increasingly intolerant of each other and ever ready to go to war. The major European powers in turn manipulated the nationalist aspirations of the subject peoples in Europe to further their own imperialist aims. I am reading again. The major European powers in turn manipulated, that means they changed the concept of nationalist aspirations of the people. The people had love for their country. The nationalist aspirations in the people means they had love for their country, but the European powers twisted and changed the meaning of nationalism in order to fulfill their aims of expanding their empire, of strengthening their rule. The major European powers in turn manipulated the nationalist aspirations of the subject peoples in Europe to further their own imperialist aims. To further means to extend, to expand their aims of imperialism, of holding control in their hands. They changed, they manipulated the meaning of nationalism which was there in the minds of the people. The most serious source of nationalist tension in Europe after 1871 was the area called the Balkans. The Balkan area became the, you can say, the center of all tension of all tension which prevailed in Europe at this time. The most serious source of nationalist tension in Europe after 1871 was the area called the Balkans. The Balkan was the region of geographical and ethnic variation. Ethnic variation, ethnic word I told you, that ethnic means, or ethnicity means, people who belong to different culture or different nationalities. The Balkans was a region of geographical and ethnic variation comprising modern-day Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Greece, Macedonia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Slovenia, Serbia, and Montenegro. So many places comprised of the Balkan region, whose inhabitants are broadly known as the Slavs. The inhabitants of all these regions, starting from Romania till Montenegro, the inhabitants of all these places were collectively called as Slavs. Now children, here I must tell you something very important. Last time, in the previous year, a question had come, who were the Slavs? This question had come in the pre-board examination, and the children misunderstood the term and they thought that this is a spelling mistake, and they changed the term on their own and wrote the definition of who were the slaves. And it proved to be a blunder because the term is Slavs, Slavs. It is not slaves. So please remember that this term is not going to change into slaves. Slavs is a specific term. When I will send you the picture of the question answers, I will also give you a question, who were the Slavs, along with the answer. Please write all the answers properly in your copies. Here, before I continue, just a little break from the paragraph. There are some children who have asked me that, ma'am, we have done our work on pages. Can we paste our pages in our copies? I will suggest you that please don't paste the pages just now in any of the copies. Keep doing your work on pages if you are doing. I am talking only under those circumstances if you are doing your work on pages. Keep stapling the pages. Keep them subject wise, keep them topic wise together. You can make a folder or a file for this, and keep all your work together, stapled according to your topics, but don't paste anything. When the school will reopen, if your teachers will ask you to paste, then you paste them. Just now you don't paste, you write them separately. If you are writing directly in a fair copy, then there is no problem. Let us come back to Slavs. Were broadly known as the Slavs. A large part of the Balkans was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. The spread of the ideas of romantic nationalism in the Balkans, together with the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire, made this region very explosive. All through the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire had sought to strengthen itself through modernization and internal reforms, but with very little success. One by one, its European subject nationalities broke away from its control and declared independence. The Balkan peoples based their claims for independence or political rights on nationality and used history to prove that they had once been independent but had subsequently been subjugated by foreign powers. So what was the problem the Balkan people were facing? They were under the domination of foreign powers and they wanted to regain their independence. The Balkan area was an independent area previously, and the people wanted to regain their independence. They put their claims for independence or for getting political rights on the basis of nationality, and they also said that once they were independent, but now they have been subjugated under by the foreign powers. Hence, the rebellious nationalities in the Balkans thought of their struggles as attempts to win back their long lost independence. So why were the people in the Balkan region most rebellious? The simple reason is that Balkan area, which was once independent, the people of the Balkan area which were living independent life, now they were under the foreign rule, and they continued to revolt. They kept on struggling so that they could win back their long lost independence. As the different Slavic nationalities struggled to define their identity and independence, the Balkan area became an area of intense conflict. Very simple. The Balkan area became an area of intense conflict because, as I said just now, the Balkan area was earlier an independent area, and now they were struggling under the foreign rule. They were dominated by the foreign rule, and they wanted to win back their independence. as the different Slavic nationalities struggled to define their identity, that means they also wanted to get their identity and independence back. But the Balkan area was the area which was the most affected area, and intense conflict was going on, serious conflicts were going on in this region. The Balkan states were fiercely jealous of each other, and each hoped to gain more territory at the expense of the others. So there were conflicts and rivalries within the Balkan area also, and they were jealous of each other and wanted to expand their territories more than the other. They wanted to get more territorial control than the others. Matters were further complicated because the Balkans also became the scene of big power rivalry. During this period, there was intense rivalry among the European powers over trade and colonies, as well as naval and military might. So not only were the Balkans fighting to expand their territories and to get their independence, but the European powers were also fighting, and they were rivals of each other's because they wanted to gain more power over trade, grab more colonies under them, and become more stronger in their naval and military might. These rivalries were very evident in the way the Balkan problem unfolded. Each power, Russia, Germany, England, Austro-Hungary, was keen on countering the hold of other powers over the Balkans. This line is important. Each power, Russia, Germany, England, and Austro-Hungary, was keen on countering the hold of other powers over Balkans. That means as soon as one power tried to get control over the Balkans, the other power counterattacked that power which was trying to grab Balkan area under them. That means in a nutshell we can say that whether it was Russia or Germany or England or Austro-Hungary, all were trying to grab the Balkan area under their control, and they were counter-attacking each other. Each power, Russia, Germany, England, Austro-Hungary, was keen on countering the hold of other powers over the Balkans and extending its own control over the area. As just now I said, they wanted to establish their control over the Balkan area. This led to a series of wars in the region and finally the First World War. First World War in 1914. So all this led to a series of wars. The Balkan conflict led to a series of wars in future and finally led to the First World War in 1914. So this is about your chapter. I suppose we have finished? No. There's a small paragraph left. The conclusion we can say. Nationalism aligned with imperial